Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. My name is Steph and I'm your host, coming to you from the National Centre for Writing in Norwich, UNESCO City of Literature. In today's episode, we're diving into the world of romantasy, a genre that blends the best of romance and fantasy. Now, romantasy novels have absolutely exploded in the publishing world in recent years, with sales expected to hit a staggering $610 million in 2024. And on TikTok, the romantasy tag has amassed over 800 million views. So what is it about these stories that captivate readers? And what makes romantasy such a rewarding genre to write? To help answer these questions, we're thrilled to welcome novelist Sangu Mandanna to The Writing Life. Sangu is the author of The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches and several other enchanting novels filled with magic, monsters, and myth. The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches is a heartwarming and uplifting fantasy about an isolated witch who finds the chance to build a new family and maybe even a new love. Sangu's upcoming romantasy novel, A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, will be published in July 2025. Sangu sat down with Ruby Pinner from the NCW team to explore the rise of romantasy and why the blend of romance and fantasy has become so beloved. They also chat about their favourite romantic fiction tropes, the comforting appeal of cosy fiction, and the magic of drawing inspiration from your hometown. So now, without further ado, I will hand over to Ruby in the interview chair, chatting with Sangu Mandanna. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Sangu.
Oh, no, thank you for having me.
I loved your book so much. A friend actually got it for me for my birthday and she kept the receipt because she was like, I feel like this book is so you. I'd be surprised if you already had it. So I really, really loved it. So today we'll be discussing your book, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and also writing romantasy. Could you please introduce yourself and give us a bit of background on your books and how you came to writing such a successful romantasy novel?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Sangu. The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches was actually I've lost count now. My eighth book. So, it was a long sort of time in the making. I feel like although my books before that didn't sort of break out in the same way, they were sort of like building blocks that got me there. I think each book makes you better. Yeah, I mean, I live in Norwich. I grew up in India. I've been in Norwich, I want to say almost 15 years now. Can't really imagine living anywhere else now. It's sort of like the perfect city for me.
I'm from Norwich, so I've lived here like my whole life and I went to university here, so I've been here forever. But I have this postcard that a friend got me and it's like a magic ball and it just says, you will live in Norwich forever. And I think it's supposed to be like I think it's supposed to be like a nice thing, but it kind of feels a little bit like a threat. But it's just, I think once people come here, it does feel like quite hard to leave. A really nice and like comfortable and like creative city to live in.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like that perfect size, isn't it? It feels like you've got enough to feel like everything you need and want is there, but you're also not it's just not that busy. It's not that noisy. It's not that frantic. Like I grew up in a very noisy, frantic city. And I like the sort of slower pace, but just slow enough that it's, like you said, comfortable, relaxing, but also not so slow that you're bored. Sort of like the Goldilocks of cities.
Yeah, I've had someone else call it like a Goldilocks city as well, but it does often feel like that, which is really nice.
And I think I just went completely off on a Norwich tangent there. But you know what? That's actually not that much of a tangent, because how I sort of came to write this book has a lot to do with living here in Norfolk. I mean, you've read it. You know that Norfolk is like a huge part of the book. It is very much a character in its own right. It is like it was always going to be set here. There was no question from the beginning when I started working on it. It felt right to finally have a story that was so centered around this part of the world. So yeah, I mean, yes, it was a part of it. So not that much of a tangent.
No, and I feel like that was one of my favorite parts of the book, was how romantic you made the Norfolk coast feel.
I think it is, though. I feel like, I mean, yes, obviously, we have those days where, we're either here in the city or we get to the coast and we're just like, right, so the weather is just a bit just there. It's just misty and foggy. But I do think that I feel like I have become the sort of person who likes the windswept, romantic, sort of Jane Austen-esque kind of beaches. Like that's sort of where my heart is now. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I will happily go to a tropical location for a holiday. But I like the cold. I don't know. I just like the windswept.
I think there's a section of your book where you talk about kind of having the windows open and like letting like the wild cold come in, but feeling kind of cozy inside and being kind of like wrapped up whilst there's all this kind of wild like cold and like coastal air going on around you is a really nice feeling. Yeah, so I really love that aspect of the book. Great. I might try and take it back to romance, but it does feel like there's been a really big surge in the popularity of romance and romancy fiction in recent years. And do you have any ideas as to why people are feeling really drawn to this genre? Yeah, and why do you think romance and fantasy have become kind of such a popular and like winning combination?
It's something I've thought about quite a lot, because you're right, it does feel like there's been a huge surge. I mean, I guess what I'd say, the caveat I would sort of add to the whole thing is that it also kind of depends on, yes, romance and fantasy, absolutely. But like romantasy as a term also has quite a specific sort of meaning right now, which is very much that like based on the current definition, and I know it's so woolly, it's nebulous, it changes, but based on what people imagine the subgenre to be right now, it tends to be sort of the darker, grittier, heavy on the romance fantasies, usually second world, very rarely contemporary. And I want to say that it seems simplistic because as readers, we've always been drawn to escapism. We've always, and like romance and fantasy are not new genres. These are hugely popular genres. Romance in particular has been like the best-selling genre ever. I would probably, I don't know the exact numbers. Crime maybe just edges it out, but it is a hugely popular genre, and it's always had subgenres. And I would argue that sometimes, depending on how you look at it, romantasy is almost a rebrand of urban fantasy, which was huge, and paranormal romance, both of which were huge 10, 15 years ago, and continue to be huge. They're just that as writers and as publishers, I think we're always rebranding to sort of not really necessarily changing the books we're writing, just sort of changing the way we talk about them and the words we're using. But I mean, I feel like if I was going to latch onto anything as a cause for the surge in the last few years, like COVID.
Romance and fiction and fantasy, they almost feel like the ultimate forms of escapism in literature. Yeah. And yeah, like if you want to expand upon like why COVID, why?
I mean, on a personal level, COVID was the reason I wrote Irregular Witches. It was everything I'd written before that. And, I still love that sort of fiction. I still love writing it, still love reading it. Was a bit grittier, a bit darker, a bit angstier. This was my first book for adults. And typically, your children's books tend to be lighter and your adult books tend to be darker and grittier. And I just sort of pivoted and went the opposite, largely because of COVID, because it was the last thing I wanted. I wanted something that was soft and gentle, and we weren't even calling it cozy fantasy at the time. That wasn't, describing a fantasy as cozy has obviously been a thing for a very long time. But the subgenre cozy fantasy wasn't even a thing we were calling it then. It was just literally just a soft, sort of gentle fantasy in my head. And it was what I needed. It was what I needed to sort of get away without getting away, because we couldn't get away. We were all in our houses all the time. It was, I think, an unprecedented, at least in almost everybody's lifetimes, sort of global lockdown. It was bizarre. I mean, I look back now and it just seems so, it's almost like, and it's not over. COVID is still happening. But that year of just lockdowns and uncertainty and what's going to happen when, and is life ever going to go back to normal? It just seems surreal now. It's almost like I look back and I think, wow, were we really just, yeah. And I remember, like, it's weird because it wasn't that long ago. And I remember those first few times we went out when it was all over, air quotes, and how weird that felt.
It was almost like you were living in the dystopia.
Yeah.
So you needed to write kind of the opposite of that, like almost a utopian.
Yeah. Yeah, very much a sort of. And you know what? I know authors who did go the other way, who leaned hard into the dystopia, because sometimes that's how you process these big, impossible feelings. And then some of us processed by escaping and kind of pivoting and writing something completely unlike anything we'd written before. And so I feel like, from my point of view, that's why I'd always loved a huge sort of range of fantasies, but I feel like my love of the softer, cozier fiction really kicked off then. And I imagine it has been much the same for a lot of authors and readers. And as is often the way in the industry, one sort of feeds the other and then the cycle continues. And, and I don't like to call this sort of thing a trend, because we are dealing with, a reaction to a global pandemic. We're dealing with people recognizing that rest and self-care matter, and that's not a trend. I very much hope that's not going to go away. But it is also, from, I guess, an industry point of view, it is a bit of a trend, in as much as you see what's selling and then people write more of it. And dystopia had its moment, sort of like the Twilight-esque. I mean, we would probably call Twilight romantasy now, but it was there long before romantasy was a term we were using.
I think there's still so much value in having a book that just makes you feel good, though, if that makes sense. I think so much of the time, like, I don't know, like me and my friends, like when we were in university studying like literature, we were reading a lot of contemporary fiction. And after we finished, we found that we just wanted to read like fantasy and romance books. And I think that's completely fine. I still enjoy contemporary fiction, but I don't think there's anything wrong with just finding books that make you feel good and bring you comfort. I think there's so much value in being able to give that to people as well in your writing.
It is very much something that I hoped I would be able to do. I mean, you can never predict how somebody will react to a book and how they'll feel about it. But bringing a little bit of joy was very much something I wanted to do. Because, again, like you said, I feel like there is something universal and not a trend, not sort of timeless, about just wanting to read something that is comforting or watch something that's comforting. We all have our comfort TV, our comfort books. And I feel like, in a way, it's funny because fantasy, which, as you said, is one of those pure forms of escapism, actually feels like it's a little bit behind the curve on the cozy and the comforting. Because for so long, I mean, obviously the books are out there. I mean, Howl's Moving Castle was written ages ago, and it's one of the coziest fantasies there is.
I've watched it so many times.
I mean, have you read the book? Because it is actually like even cozier and more charming, if that's possible. I just love it so much. I cannot recommend it enough. But yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago. So, I mean, obviously these books did exist. But when you think about it, like, romance has been a comforting genre for centuries. Cozy mysteries have been so popular for decades. And it feels like for so long, fantasy was very much defined by high stakes and, sword and sorcery and that kind of thing. And it's only recently that not only are we opening it up to new voices and new perspectives, but also to experimenting within it to actually kind of, do that thing where it's like Animal Crossing, but in a book, just like slice of life. Things that and I think it's a mistake as well to sort of dismiss it as fluff or to diminish the idea that something that just makes you feel comforted is somehow less worthy than an important piece of literary drama, because I don't think one is more valid than the other.
I agree. And I feel like in your book, you explore a lot of themes of kind of chosen family and finding community whilst feeling like an outsider and having to keep parts of your identity a secret. They feel very prevalent in your book. And I'd just be quite interested to see why you chose to explore those particular topics. And do you think that topics like this that can be quite challenging it's quite a successful way of exploring those themes through cozy fiction?
Yeah, I do actually, because I think there's an idea, and people have been saying this about romance for decades, that somehow it's pure fluff. It's nonsense. It's just, something that, women read because they feel like reading about a hot man. And, it's just this very heteronormative, very kind of reductive way of looking at a genre that's brought so much comfort and joy to millions of people. And I think it's much the same with cozy fiction. Just because it's cozy, just because it's softer and lighter in tone and in theme, it doesn't mean it's not dealing with things that are very real to us. And it's no different from dealing with it. I mean, the books I wrote right before I wrote this one were a space opera trilogy that was quite dark, lots of war and death and dealing with themes that are not that dissimilar from the ones in this book. They're just dealt with in very different ways. And again, I think it was important to me, especially as a reaction to COVID, to explore that sense of isolation, of needing community, of what it's like to feel like there isn't anyone you can reach out to, but slowly discovering along the way that you can find those people. You can find your people. Because at the time, we were all struggling with that. I think that was the first time so many of us recognized how much we relied on human contact, like even just the casual, everyday human contact that you have. And I think that's a huge part of why isolation was such a big aspect of that book. And, in addition to that, it was also very much about, like you said, being an outsider, feeling like you're looking for something that you haven't yet found because you feel like you're not quite fitting in. And again, I think that's quite universal. There are ways in which we all feel like we're just not quite where we belong. And it's always lovely to reach a point where you think, I found where I'm happy. I found the place or the people. Yeah, and I want to sort of explore that transition from questioning your place to discovering that you do have one or finding one.
And kind of going back to the romance side of writing, is there, because I think alongside having a lot of substance in your book, I think a lot of what I enjoy about romance books is kind of the tropes that you come across too. And I think that's often what can make these books so fun. But do you have a favorite sort of romance trope in romance fiction?
I mean, I have to admit, there's lots. There are lots. There is absolutely so many tropes that I cannot get enough of when I'm reading it.
I don't know what it is as well. I don't completely understand the psychology behind it, but there's something about enemies to lovers. Or
if I had to pick a top trope, it would probably be enemies to lovers, with sort of Grumpy Sunshine as a very close second. And if you could combine them, even better. Yeah, it is. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I mean, we're talking about a trope that is as old as Romeo and Juliet, right? It's older, even, Greek myths.
Oh, Jane Eyre is kind of grumpy. I don't know. But enemies to lovers feels quite prevalent in Jane.
It's a little bit enemies to lovers. It's definitely a bit of, I don't know. Like, I think it's easy to kind of decide where the grumpy is. But I feel like Jane could be a little sunshine. That's what part of the fun as well, I think, is looking back at books you love and recognizing the tropes, even if they're not exactly the way you picture them, and how tropes adapt and are interpreted and reinterpreted by people depending on their perspective. But yeah, enemies to lovers, it just gets me. It's every time. Something in my brain chemistry is just like forbidden romance. Yes, that's it.
I know. I think the one that I find really funny is fake dating. I'm not sure, like that one seems particularly prevalent, and it's one of my best friend's favorite trope. And I don't completely understand why. But
that's the amazing thing about like the genre and tropes, isn't it? It's just that there are things that don't quite click for some of us, and then there are ones that that do. And like, fake dating is a very popular one. I don't think I have strong feelings about it one way or another. I think it depends on how it's done. But love triangles, that's one that I'm just not. I don't think I've ever seen it done in a way that has felt to me. Like, I know there's loads of popular love triangles in romance, but for me personally, I don't think I've ever seen it done in a way that makes it feel earned. If that makes sense. Like, if you go back to sort of like some of the older popular classics, so to speak, and you've got Bella, Edward, Jacob, and all that, and for me, there was always an obvious answer.
What was the obvious answer? Were you? Which team were you on?
Well, I wasn't really on a team. Like, I guess I was Team Edward. But more than it was obvious that she was always going to end up with Edward. There was never a question that the third, like, I don't know, point, what would you call them? The third axis, the third point of the triangle was ever actually, it felt more like an inconvenience, a nuisance than anything else. And I feel like for me, a lot of the time, love triangles, unless they're done really, really well, do feel like there's one axis that just doesn't fit. And the thing is, there are times when that's the point that you read it and that one of those axes, I don't know what it is, a point in the triangle. Anyway, you read it and one of those three is obviously an obstacle rather than the end game. And that I'm fine with. Like, it might be annoying, but it's annoying in the way all obstacles are annoying when they get in the way of our favorite couple. But yeah, so but I have loads and loads of author and reader friends who love triangles. So I think I love the fact that for everybody it's different.
Are there any particulars in the sort of specialising in the genre of romantasy that you particularly admire and what they're doing with the genre at the minute?
Oh, that's a good one. There are so many. And here I'm going to sort of broaden my kind of like definition of romantasy and go with literally romances that are fantasy or fantasies that have like strong romances here, as opposed to a very narrow definition of the sort of a romantasy. But Tasha Sori, who recently finished her Burning Kingdoms trilogy, I love what she does with romance and with fantasy because, much like Samantha Shannon as well, there's sort of like there's the fantasy, but it's also queer, it's also unapologetically of a sort of world and ethnicity and ancestry. There's distinctly not the standard Western European elves and dragons sort of world. And I love that. I love that that's what she is doing. And, and she would say this as well, I imagine, that she's not by no means the first. None of us are the first at what we're Nobody is doing anything for the first time. But I love the way that we're all putting our stamp on something that can be traced back thousands of years. I mean, you think about it, mythology is fantasy, and we've been living with mythology for forever. So yeah, Satasha Suri's, you know what, I'm probably going to look back and kick myself because I'm not actually 100% convinced it's the Burning Kingdom. I'm sure it's called the Burning Kingdoms trilogy, but it's the one that starts with the Jasmine Throne. Like, I know the book titles, but the trilogy titles, I'm always like, oh, is it that one or is it that one? But, we can, yeah, you can edit that part out if it's completely wrong.
Is there a particular branch of mythology that you think that's maybe not being explored in literature today? Because I feel like we went through a phase of having so many books about Greek mythology. Do you think?
I think we still are.
Yeah.
I by no means think the Greek mythology
I don't think it's over.
has died out. It's I don't think it will, because you know what, these are incredible stories. Mm-hmm. But again, what I think I love is that what we're seeing recently is this huge uptick in Greek mythology retellings that are retelling the stories of women who were typically portrayed in these myths as villains. I don't know if you've read Stone Blind, which is sort of reimagining, and not even reimagining really, just looking at Medusa's story from a slightly different point of view, which absolutely makes her the victim and survivor of horrific circumstances, and makes Perseus, who is, supposedly the hero, an absolute villain of the piece. And I love that. I love that we're finally looking at some of these stories that have been told through such a strict patriarchal lens, finally looking at them in a more feminist way, in a more ethnically diverse way, in a more queer-centric way. And again, because sometimes this is laughable, that so much of Greek mythology in the intervening years has sort of been what's the word, straight-washed? What is it where you just make everything
heteronormatized? I don't know.
It's not heteronormatized. I don't even know what the word is, but effectively straight-washed. That I saw somebody post, and I can't remember who it was, but it was just one of those posts you see when you're scrolling through Instagram, and there was somebody posting a screenshot of some other tweet, which was basically that it was like, oh no, it was a 1-star review for the movie Troy from 20 years ago, which was, I could deal with all the historical inaccuracies, but making Achilles straight was just cross the line for me, which, valid.
Yeah. The actual original stories feel quite inherently queer, and it's just such a shame that part has been removed. And now it feels like, I think a lot of people almost feel like it's something that people are adding in to sort of appeal to the current climate, and that's completely wrong.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely ridiculous, because we are in fact going back to the roots of these stories rather than adding in things that weren't there in the first place. It was in fact the men predominantly in the intervening period who were taking things away from these stories. But so I just love that it's happening. But in terms of mythology, actually, funnily enough, if you'd asked me this, say 10 years ago, I would have said pretty much any mythology that isn't European, would need. But I do love the fact that we are seeing so much more fiction and fantasy and reimaginings that are rooted in Egyptian mythology, in Indian mythology, in Southeast Asian mythology, in East Asian mythology. And so we're getting to see, or at least get a glimpse into these stories and these cultures that for so long were sort of shut out of mainstream English language fiction. And so actually obviously there is a way to go. We're still seeing a lot more Greek and Norse and Roman mythology than we are outside of Europe. But happily, I feel like we're finally in a place where I can say, you know what, I think it's nice that we're seeing new stories and different stories.
And I just wanted to ask, do you have any advice for writers who are wanting to start exploring the genre of romantasy and fantasy and romance?
I would say, I always feel like such a fraud when, I mean, this isn't, why did you ask me that question? It's more of because absolutely, I mean, I absolutely get why you've asked me that question. I always feel like such a fraud answering it though, because a lot of the time,
it feels like quite a big responsibility as well.
I feel like a big responsibility. It also feels like no matter how many books I write, I'm always learning. Like I've never stopped learning. I feel like I would be bored if I wasn't learning all the time. But, if I was going to give any sort of advice to somebody who wants to start out in the genre, and this is, probably trite, but just the trends, just don't cling to the trends. It's so tempting. Believe me, I know. I've done it. I have, or tried it anyway. It doesn't work. The best books are the books that you want to write with honestly, writing books is hard. If the story isn't something you're passionate about, it's just not worth it. It's a slog. And, I think that we as writers, because we tend to be good with words, can make it seem like a very romantic, creative, artistic process. But sometimes it is just a slog. It is absolutely a chore getting the words out. And
writing is really hard.
It is a very, very hard thing to do. I think that art gets this reputation for being easy, and it's not. All sort of creative work can be incredibly difficult and incredibly tedious sometimes, because at the end of the day, it's not all, I'm writing the best scene ever. Sometimes you have to write, the connective tissue that isn't necessarily the most exciting scene. You have to find a way to make it exciting. And just don't even get me started. But I think that, it's so, one of the things I feel the most strongly about is the fact that this is a hard thing to do. And if you're not passionate about the story, it's just going to feel that much harder.
And I feel like your book does feel like it comes from a place of like loving the setting and like escaping to somewhere that you really love. And it does feel like there's joy behind it.
I would say there is. And, thank you for saying that, because it was not a book I expected to write. It was a reaction to something huge that was happening. But obviously that story still carries themes that I've written about for years. And it does come from a place of, and it was still a hard book to write, in spite of the fact that it was escapism, it was soft, it was gentle. It was still hard to write, and I wouldn't have got through it if it wasn't the book that I was passionate about writing. And there was absolutely no indication at the time that there was going to be a trend in cozy. But, here we are. And I think that as new writers trying out a voice in a new genre, we need to be passionate about what we're writing. And chasing trends is disheartening and soul destroying, frankly, because it never works. By the time you've caught up, the trends moved on. But if it's something that you love, like say you absolutely passionately love fantasy romance, well, that's never going to go away. That's, even if the trend for the current kind of school of romantasy, that very specific sort of second world fantasy with, a dark, possibly forbidden romance and so on, even if that trend comes and goes, fantasy romance isn't going anywhere. And if it's something you're passionate about, it really won't matter if you've missed the air quotes trend, because your book will still matter if it's come from a place of something real. I don't know if any of that made sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I think especially in kind of the era of book talk, it just feels very, and even like when we were talking about the tropes earlier, it feels like you're just trying to slot everything or slot your writing into a box.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like that's a step. It's a step on the road to AI, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to force a story to tick boxes is just, a few steps further down that road, and you're just getting artificial intelligence to write books, and nobody wants that because it becomes soulless. And I think that there is always a danger when anything is hugely popular, and when, you have book talk and bookstagram and booktube. Is that a thing? I feel like, but especially now with book talk, I think there's a danger in been falling into the trap of thinking that I must write a book that ticks these specific boxes. And especially when you sort of look at the numbers and you think, oh, these are the books that are selling well, and oh, the book talk are saying these are the tropes that are selling well. It's very easy to fall into that trap. And I've done it. We've all done it. We've all tried to write to a trend. And I remember trying to write dystopian back when it was huge, and it just wasn't me. And that was very much a boat I missed. But, I don't really have any regrets looking back.
It's nice that you've kind of found yourself by writing just the genre that you most enjoy writing, though. Like, I feel like it sounds like you found a part of yourself.
I haven't really thought about it that way, but now that you've said it, it's true, yeah. And I am actually very, very happy about that I have made my space in the industry, made by writing the books I want to write. I haven't, like I said, 8th book. It took me 8 books to have any kind of mainstream success, but all of those, the 7 books before were also books I wanted to write, and I don't regret any of them. And it's nice knowing that, yeah, like you said, I kind of got to this point by writing the things I wanted to write.
But to round things off, what are you working on at the moment, and do you have any new work coming out soon?
Yes, I do. So next week, I have the first book in my new fantasy adventure series for middle grade readers coming out. It's called Vanya and the Wild Hunt. And that's out in the UK next week and in the US the week after. And in July is my next adult witchy romance, fantasy, romantasy, whatever we're calling it, cozy fantasy, A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, which sounds like it should be either a sequel or a companion to Irregular Witches, but it's not. It's just same vibes, completely different characters. And that's out in July. So I do have a couple of things, and I am currently in the sort of early stages of writing my next, and by next I mean after this year, my next sort of cozy fantasy.
Can you give us any hints as to, is it going to be like a witchy book, or can you give us any?
It's so nebulous right now that I could, even if I was allowed to give you hints, I don't think I could, because I'm just it's very much in that, that exciting stage where all of the ideas are coming and you're just sort of picking the best ones and trying to tell the story, and you're still finding your way through the story. It's very much in that stage.
It's quite an exciting stage to be in as well, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen.
I know this from experience now. This is very much the good stage before the stage of, oh, well, this is crap. I'm just not, why do I even bother? And that stage will come, I promise.
I think it comes for I think that kind of shows that it comes for everyone, though.
I was talking to another author about this a few months ago, and we were both like, do we think Stephen King ever has this
imposter
moment
syndrome
when he writes? Do we think that it happens to even, people like Stephen King? I don't know. If anybody knows him, they should ask.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Sangu, for chatting with us today.
Thank you for having me. This was lovely.
A big thank you to Sangu Mandanna and Ruby Pinner for sharing their time and insights with us today. Don't forget to pick up a copy of The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches from your local bookshop or library. If you're eager to dive deeper into the world of romantasy or writing romance in general, check out our rich collection of resources at nationalcenterforwriting.org.uk/romance-fiction. We offer writing templates, interviews, book lists, courses, and events that focus on romantic fiction. And we're especially excited to announce that million-copy best-selling author Rachel Hoare will be leading a 12-week comprehensive course on how to write a romance novel online, starting 6th of May 2025. Study at your own pace and get personalised one-to-one feedback from Rachel herself. For more details and to sign up, visit nationalcenterforwriting.org.uk/tutored-courses. As always, if you have any questions or you want to get in touch, you can find us at Writers Centre on Blue Sky and Instagram, or on Facebook. You can also sign up for the NCW newsletter at nationalcenterforwriting.org.uk. As a UK registered charity, we rely on the support of our generous donors to continue our work. To help us keep offering valuable resources, you can make a donation by visiting our Support Us page on the website. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a 5-star rating and a review, because it really helps others to find us. Thanks again for tuning in, keep writing, and I will catch you on the next episode.